Okay, evening everyone. So today we'll be going through a mid-season review, and the theme, of course, is building consistency through simple, positive rugby. So a few things have changed. Some resources have been updated online, as well as a few interactive tools have been created so that everyone can work on their own in the off season, and using any rugby that you have access to, either local or otherwise, just so we're fresh and ready to go for 2020. So I'll introduce that new definition and skills framework, as well as the new coach logic review process. There's a few new filters, and everything is going to tie a little bit more seamlessly with those definitions and skills. We'll look at the mid-season trends, kind of how we're doing and what we're seeing across, the stats we've been able to gather from our analyst, Derek Pugh, as well as feedback from coaches, referees, and CMOs using the Coach Logic platform. We'll look at some training tools for 2020. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few things that have been created so people can do work at their own pace. Not everyone has time to jump on calls like this one or attend team trainings or referee trainings. So keeping pace with where we're at entering into 2020, we have some resources that are use at your own pace in nature. And we'll look at the key dates and information for 2020. Some things coming up on and off the field to take note of. So we'll make sure that before we get off the call this evening, those are addressed as well. So diving right in, so we used to have that competency grid, and what it was specific competencies or skills that referees would display during a game. I've changed that a little bit in consultation with referees and coaches and CMOs. We've shifted that, and we've gone towards more of a skill based, or what referees actually do to facilitate, and all of those referee do skills down here are correspondent with positive rugby definitions. So if we look at an area such as the breakdown, the key definitions for all stakeholders, players, coaches, administrators, and referees, are role specific. So we're looking at tackler. Basically, what is a positive definition for what a tackler should do after they made the tackle, of course, is not be in the way of ball delivery. The law says roll away, and often if tacklers try to roll, they get in the way of the halfback, or they get in the way of the clean out or the ball. So, or if they make less movement but are able to move a limb and just be aware of where the ball is, often we can play on or get quick ball that should be available. So the cue we're using for the players and coaches is not in the way of ball delivery. For arriving players, we generally look at both teams when the gain line is neutral. So it's actually quite rare that we look at both teams equally. But when we're in a situation when that's appropriate, the key positive definition for those players is before they compete, they have both feet behind the ball. And both feet behind the ball clarifies generally what that gait means. That gait can be quite a confusing or subjective term, but using the wording both feet behind the ball generally makes things a bit more clear according to the feedback that we've received from coaches and players over the last 2 seasons. So that's just the picture we're looking for when both teams are at an equal opportunity to compete. In most cases, however, it's actually the arriving defenders who are the people we're most interested in. That being said, the attack generally, in BC anyway, wins the gain line about 60% of the time. So if the attack are winning, the people that we're more interested in seeing, whether they comply or not, are the defense, because clearly the team under pressure, or the team that doesn't own the balance of the contest, is the team that generally infringes. And that's what we're out to do with these definition and skills. Is we're not out to catch everything or play gotcha. We're out to make decisions on those actions that are not owning the balance of the contest, or in other words, under pressure. So arriving defenders, what we're looking for is the ability to be in a position to lift the ball, or move somebody. So obviously lifting the ball, when to use the jargon term, if someone's in a jackling position, they are looking to lift the ball. So obviously if they have their hands on the ball, that's not necessarily good enough. And we're not going to, at the same token, judge people harshly for having an elbow or a knee that grazes the ground. If they're in a position where they can lift the ball off the ground, they are positive. And if they're in a position where they can move an opposition player in a counter ruck and before they go off their feet, so if they're actually moving someone backwards, we're in a position where we can reward them by playing on or penalizing the opposition who may deny a turnover that we feel should come. And of course, in the most rare of situations, we actually have negative gain line tackles. So that's when the attack does not make it to where the spot of the previous ruck was, and they end up with most of the support in front of the ball having to work back. In those situations, we actually look at those attacking support players, and what we need to see from them is they're moving opposition, or if they're ending up in a latch or ceiling position with the hands on the ball carrier, which is acceptable, they at least have their feet on the ground. I've heard a lot of technical speak about shoulders up or chest down, and really everyone's agreed to the notion that if the attacking support or latch player has their feet on the ground as opposed to the soles of their feet facing the sky, they are at least in a position that they're more or less supporting their weight. So making it simple, they're either moving someone out if it's a attacking support with a threat focus before they go to ground. Similar language to what we use for both arriving players in a counteract situation. Or if they're in a latch or seal situation, they at least have their feet on the ground when they're doing that action. So each of these definitions has corresponding refereeing skills. Effectively, when the tackler is the person we're most interested in, which is 75% of cases, if not more, we're observing and we're asking ourselves a simple question. So what do we need to observe? Well, if the tackler is on the wrong side or not. If yes, well, we don't necessarily penalize them for being on the wrong side. We have to make a decision, and that decision is twofold. It's either they're in the way, in which case we blow a penalty, or they're not in the way, in which case we blow play on. And it's generally not best practice to play advantage in this area, because my challenge to those who do would be, if you've played advantage, you've either led to a situation where potential foul play can occur with people stepping on people and whatnot, or the ball was available the whole time and you probably didn't need to get involved in that decision. So again, it's observe, tackle on the wrong side. Well, okay, decide, are they in the way or not in the way? And of course, if we're not looking at a tackler on the wrong side, we can move on to either of these three roles. So if we have a neutral situation where it could be anyone's ball, otherwise known as a 50-50, we're just looking for people that are not in front of the ball. If we see someone who's in front of the ball, then we have to decide, did they get in the way and prevent the side that should have possession from having possession? Well, then we need to penalize. If they didn't have an effect, then we can play on. So again, just because we're observing a player in that particular compromised position, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're penalizing. And again, we're not, if we have an arriving player issue, we don't want to play advantage too much, because again, it could be said that if a person truly gets in the way and we're playing advantage, well, that could lead to potential foul play, late comers in, putting a shoulder onto them, contact with the head, or again, stepping on people. And again, the challenge would come to that, I would say to that referee, if they're in the way in your view and the ball's available, and it's quality possession, why are we getting involved? Can we just play on? And again, looking at most cases when we have the arriving defender, are they in a position to lift the ball? So again, the attack has controlled the gain line. So we're looking at that jackler, in which most cases where the defense are going backwards, they actually have a crack at the ball rather than space. So are they able to lift the ball? So rather than getting into technicalities of, did they have their elbows on the ground, or are they supporting their weight, or their knees, like all these very, or head above hips, or all these very technical subjective definitions. Our definition is simple. Are they in position to lift the ball? If the ball's lifted, well, we can play on. If it's not lifted, well, we have two decisions from there. It's play on or penalty kick. Obviously, it's play on if we feel it's not lifted and they got moved off the ball. It's penalty kick if we feel that they should have had the ball and weren't really cleaned out, and the ball carrier kind of contributed to that net result. And, in the most rare cases, we're looking at the clean out when the attack is on the back foot or they haven't quite made it to the gain line. And we're asking the questions, did they move anybody, or did they just fall on the ball or on the ball carrier? In which case, we'd have a decision to make, especially if we feel if the defense is on the front foot. So again, it's just using the momentum to help guide our decision-making process. Similar space, a little bit simpler to look at. It's more of a location focus rather than a role specific focus. Pillars, obviously inside channels, the defensive line mainly referring to midfield channels and wide channels. Timing at ruck is obviously, is if everyone started on side and they have good and the ball's off the ground, have at. And then general play, obviously we're only concerned with people while the ball's being passed around, not being in front of the ball, impeding the opposition from either making a tackle or running a support line, catching a pass, etc. And corresponding refereeing skills, very simple. Going back to space, is we just want to arrive early, establish precedence, and keep those pillars clearly behind the last foot. And why clearly is in capitals there is what's the message been said to coaches is we don't want to referee a game, and they don't want to play a game or coach a game where the defenders are harassing the halfback at every second breakdown. We obviously, if the tackler is moving out the way and there's been good support, we want to see quick ball that's unimpeded. So obviously we need to be keeping that first defender or first two defenders clearly behind the last foot with every part of their body, especially when it comes to quick ball and go forward situations. Moving and scanning. So obviously the key skill here is decide, when the contest is over, meaning there might be still people on their feet competing, but when you decide as the referee that, the attack's won the situation, it's getting a clear view of the D-line, being on the attacking side, turning your head and making eye contact with those midfield defenders so they stay back as long as possible. And it actually creates an opportunity for them. If defenders aren't continuously encroaching on the defensive line, well, then referees aren't pushing them back. So then they can shoot up with line speed. And it's a cue that a lot of coaches use often is line speed. So if everyone starts on side, well, then referees are aware of who's on side. And if people shoot up and the halfback happens to be a little bit slow, one of the skills there is actually not blowing your whistle. So it's not penalizing those shooters who, time things exceptionally well, are aware of when the ball is lifted. And, if they happen to make a tackle behind the gain line, they are legitimate. So the key skill is know who starts on side. We can forgive timing if it's a fraction of a second early. What's harder to forgive is if those defenders start on side. And of course, all of these things are complementary. We don't know where the defensive line should be if we don't know where the pillars should be. And we can't determine who's on side if those two aren't established. And obviously, going back to general play, this is pretty much a trigger cue. So if we see people in front of the ball, so between the ball and their attacking goal line, we're not necessarily penalizing them. We're asking the question, are they affecting play? Are they getting in the way of the attack or of the defense? And if that's the case, then we might have a decision to make. Set piece, pretty simple. It's more of a timing situation. So Scrum setup, we're referring to the moment before the ball is in. So obviously the setting up of the front rows, the alignment, the binding process, and obviously having stability at every step. That's what we're looking for from the players and coaches. What does that mean from referee? Well, we want to set them up for success. So we want to make sure that the hookers are aligned to the left of the mark, that binds are quite clear, there's no shoulders hidden, everyone is square, and that we have stability, meaning people aren't moving their feet, hips or shoulders before we move on to the next step in the process. Ball in, so both sides of the scrum pushing forward and going forward and pushing straight. And the key is we say both sides, just so we don't have that spinning of the scrum or just the loose head going forward. And it doesn't necessarily mean both sides equally, but as long as both sides have moved off of the mark, then we can look at rewarding. And what do we do as referees? Well, we've done all our work here. All our work happens at the setup. At the ball in process, we need to step back and we need to observe who's actually going forward. Looking at the feet is a good cue for that. Line out to maul setup. So we're looking at clear gap in both teams starting on side. Obviously, referees getting there quickly, setting up that massive gap. And obviously, both teams starting on side. That not necessarily pertains to backline, but we're looking for those receivers to be at least 2 meters away, and the defending player in that channel, sometimes it's the defensive hooker. Actually, a lot of times in modern rugby, it's the 9, but obviously that defensive player in the 5 meter channel has to be 2 and 2. And obviously that creates space for the players to restart the game successfully. So we set the players up for success. We set up, just like a scrum, we set up a big gap at a line out, and we make sure that all the players are in the right spaces by getting there early. And finally, once we get the ball into the scrum or into the line out, we're looking at clear, go forward with control. That's what dominance is. And the refereeing skill, we observe who's moving forward. And as soon as we determine who's moving forward, we determine who's under pressure. And we make decisions based on those key questions, just so that we don't miss the thing that everyone expects. So that would be the idea behind that. Foul play, our last of the 4 areas. For the players, tackle just below the shoulder line and attempt to grasp with arms. That's the language they've been told. What does that mean for referees? We're looking at the contact point on the ball carrier below the shoulder and grasp with the arm. So having a clear view of the head, neck, and shoulders of the ball carrier is vital. Obstruction, so behind the ball or actively avoiding contact, is what the players need to have in mind. And what does that mean for referees is the players that are in front are not affecting the play. Under pressure, well, that's if teams are under pressure and they're going backwards, or they're under territory pressure. If they decide to have a crack, either at a maul or at a scrum or at a breakdown or in general play, they clearly start in an onside position and then they win or contest the ball fairly. And as referees, we read who's under pressure and what they do to cope. And that helps set up our, big picture decisions, whether or not we need a yellow card or a penalty try or just a penalty. We know who's under pressure early. So that's our reading of the game skill. Dangerous play, control your own bodies. That's mainly referring to off-ball situations, reckless actions that are not necessarily in a tackle. And we just have to reserve. If we see something that's reckless and we see a limb flashing out or a player jumping in the air kind of awkwardly, we just make sure we have a good look. And all we do is identify clear facts. If we see someone tackle someone in the air, we've seen someone tackle someone in the air. If we see somebody lash out with their foot and make contact to someone's body, well, we make sure that we make decisions that identify those clear facts and we deal with them. We don't overreact or underreact. So we'll get into some clips now. So just looking at, apologies and thank you for staying with me through that new tool. It's going to be available up online. I'll show you where that is in a minute, but we'll get to some more interactive pieces just now. So in the fall of 2019, the 4 areas in which we did very well, according to some of the teams and the CMOs and the referees themselves, dealing with tackler in the way. And what that looks like, the situations where there's been a clear, person in the way, so to speak. So let's just look at a situation where we have a positive example of a tackler in the way, and we are able to deal with it. So what I really like about this clip is the fact that the referee doesn't waste much time, because he's already stopping right over here. He's getting a clear view of this. He sees the tackler lands kind of awkwardly. The ball carrier is able to half fight through the tackle. So he just has a quick look at what he needs to see here, and that tackler not in the way is what he needs to see. And obviously, as he moves around, he's got his decision ready to go. Tackler is still in the way. Obviously, the ball has been stolen illegally. So we're not looking at a hands in the ruck decision or some secondary impact. The player we're most interested in is this player here, and that's the behavior we want to change. So again, we've done that pretty well across the board. So that's something we hope to continue looking for in the restart of the season in 2020. So again, tackle on the wrong side, we ask ourselves the question, did they get in the way of the clean out or the ball? In this situation with a person contesting right over, referee doesn't have a lot of options. We can't allow that contest to be won by white simply because the tackler hasn't moved. So moving on to our second positive area, lineout and maul setup has been very, very good across the board. And that's actually one of the things, even from the most difficult games, such as this past week, there was a very difficult game at scrum time for one of our referees. But one of the positive comments that came up from the teams was that referee owned the lineout and maul setup very, very effectively. So, just food for thought. Often lineouts, because of penalty kicks into touch, can take place, 25 to 30 times a game, whereas scrums average 15 to 18 at most. So that lineout skill, super good to have a handle on. So well done to the referees this year for being on top of that. And just an example of what good line out and maul setup looks like. Is the following. So obviously referee gets there early, sets the defenders, sets the attack as well, massive gap, moves to the back. And this is actually a key skill. A lot of people are hanging out in the front. I would say 80% of lineouts in the modern game at divisions 1 and above are going to the back. Some of the lower divisions we go to the front, but even in the age grade finals, we had under 15 kids throwing to the middle and sometimes throwing to the back. So going to the back, good option, especially with an AR. You can see where the 5 meter line is. You can see if the ball's taken there. And often you're in a congested position if they do go to the front. So going to the back is probably the best option in the modern game. The other thing it helps you do is as the ball's being thrown in, you can see where the danger person is entering to try and disrupt that. So we see that the referee is aware of where the ball is. The catch happens. So the line out part is very, very good. The receiver ends up staying out 2 meters, which is fine. Often what happens is the receiver encroaches. So here the referee's actually had a look, makes eye contact early with the receiver, and is in a position to make sure that they're still there. Often that receiver encroaches on the line and ends up basically being, an extra person in that line out, and shuts down any off the top options or, sheer to the left options from the maul in this situation. So well done. Receivers back 2 meters, doesn't even bother competing because of their starting on side. Catch and drive happens. And again, the maul's dynamic. The referee rolled to the right a little bit to see what's happening here. This player no longer relevant because the ball obviously shifting to the left. Referee realizes that, moves to the left. And again, it's kind of like a very dynamic scrum. We're not worried about this player. They're not affecting the situation. They've been bound the whole time. We see that the same maul happens as it rolls. 4 doesn't change his bind the whole time. Now he does, gets managed out of there. And as it goes to the blind side, the referee and the AR work together to see the grounding. So that's actually just an example of what a lot of referees have been doing this year. So really good job across the board on that setup. And again, it starts with the massive gap. Get everyone where you want them to be, including that receiver being 2 meters away from the line out, and then get to the back. Because again, most of the action, whether it's off the top or whether it's a maul formation at the next step, is going to happen at the back. And you also have more options to escape if the ball comes towards you, as opposed to being, pinned between the touch line and the 5 meter line. Another area that's been a strength so far has been the dangerous tackles and applying the high tackle framework. So that tool from World Rugby, I found has been, and according to everyone's performance, has been pretty effective. So again, that put into practice. Another example of some strong refereeing. And again, I've just taken these as examples, but there are dozens of them available on Coach Logic if you wanted to have a look. But what I like about this one is just the referee sees the high contact about to happen, is able to gather the relevant facts, and makes a sensible decision. Identifies that there's space. So clearly we have a situation the defender's under a little bit of pressure. Half gap, high contact happens. Referee blows the whistle right away. No overreaction, high tackle, penalty only. And why is it penalty only? Well, obviously the high tackle framework asks the question, is it a high tackle? Is it above the line of the shoulders? Is there use of the arms? Obviously, if those answers yes, the next question is there head or neck contact? The word direct and indirect was taken right out of there. So all we need to worry about is what's the level of danger. High contact happens there. In that still image, it looks bad, but if you actually look at it one frame or two more, we see that the ball carrier is actually able to power through the tackle and dominate, continue driving his feet. The tackler falls off of him. It's still a high tackle. It's still a penalty, but the degree of danger is pretty low. And as we see that the tackler actually takes the brunt of the impact. So penalty only is the correct decision. And again, excellent application of the framework across the board from our referees in BC so far this year. Lastly, in terms of and again, these aren't the only areas people did well in individually, but these were the common themes across the board, was our work to create space in the midfield channels. So particularly at ruck, once the ball was won, referees were doing a good job of, turning their head, turning their bodies, squaring up to the defense, not turning into the defensive line too early, and creating that space for the teams to be able to play. Here's our example. So obviously quick ball being expected here. The referee smartly identifies that the contest is already over, doesn't bother going in close to the ruck because he realizes there's a potential traffic area here with defenders retreating and the first receiver ready to go. Immediately turns his head. He realizes this player, our pillars are fine. They're well behind the last feet. And actually well done to those players for working hard to get onside and defend legally. There's a bunch of retiring players, so the referee turns his head immediately and actually gets even that last player. You can see he can be considered a lazy runner at this point. This is 13 blue, Colby Mason, quality outside center in the competition. The referee turns his head just a second earlier, turns his head, identifies him, locks eye contact with these two players, and is able to gesture quickly to get this player onside. And he actually ends up behind his whole defensive line, creating, giving the defense that are legal an opportunity to compete, and obviously keeping the space for the attack to be able to exploit what they worked hard to create. So again, creating space isn't just to benefit the attack, it's so that both teams have the opportunity to compete. So just before we continue, if anyone wants to weigh in on the positive areas so far, and I've aligned them with our new definition and skills as well. So if anyone wants to weigh in, feel free to do so now. Again, you can touch the mute button on the bottom left or bottom right of the screen, depending on which version of the software you're using. Okay, excellent. Yeah, not as many questions on the positives as there are with the areas of development, but not to worry, we'll move on. So the areas where obviously players, coaches, referees, and CMOs, we all pretty much agreed, the ones that have been engaged in the conversation on Coach Logic and other platforms. Our awareness of who's under pressure in big moments wasn't always consistent. Scrum, the setup, again, it's probably always going to be a work on. There's so many things going on at the setup stage of the Scrum, but that was in there as well. And just a bit on empathy, and we'll get to this last, but the notion that actions are louder than words, we still have a tendency to try and explain away certain trends and certain situations rather than either not reacting at all to a nothing, or giving an appropriate sanction if action does need to be taken, rather than trying to hope the players comply through some kind of verbal interaction. So looking at that first piece, big decision, awareness of who's under pressure. So obviously, we talked about this last year in a few sessions, and in our previous online session, those go moments, or a line break, a turnover, an intercept, and stuff like that, a big scrum or a big maul or a big hit. So obviously we have a line break here, and infringement comes in there. Playing a little bit advantage in the attacking 22, not the worst outcome, but not only in this situation, but in many of them, we settled for penalty only, and we treated the infringement like it was an isolation. Again, that's the 10-meter line, so we're 40 meters out here, and they're able to make a 25 to 30 meter line break inside the 22. Infringement comes in right on the 22 meter line. High tackle shuts down potential offload, because the only defender out here is this player here who's not in a position to defend credibly. And this infringement actually allows the defense to get back in position. So again, line break comes in, defense is under pressure, 15 is the last defender, has a support player, so we're not thinking penalty try or anything like that. But again, we look in the time and space that this infringement creates to stop an offload or a pass illegally through high tackle. It allows this defense, which is very compromised and a ton of space to turn into this defense with, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players able to realign. So just something to be aware of when there's a line break or a big change in momentum. We need to be ready to make the big decision, whether that's a yellow card or even sometimes a penalty only. But in this situation, a penalty probably just doesn't justify it, because a try is, you know, potentially on, and you know, if we go to, you know, no advantage back to the mark, obviously there's going to be no quick tap opportunity. The defense is well established, and it's going to be 3 points. So we need to make up for that balance that the defense was able to artificially affect. And again, that's not any particular referee. That's just as a group, we often haven't been aware of who's under pressure. So we're not saying go and yellow card and red card a bunch of people. It's just be aware of, hey, there's a line break. I might have to have a quick glance at what the players under pressure are going to do to cope. And maybe they might do something spectacular and we can play on. But just giving ourselves the time to be able to appreciate the situation. Scrum, so setup. Couple of clips here. So obviously, one of the core skills is we want stability at every phase. So the bind call comes in here. There's still a bit of movement, and right away, the scrum's never really stable. There's a bunch of adjustments and stuff going on, and these two props are continuing to battle for space throughout the setup process. Eventually, the scrum completely collapses, and it's not like one of those scrums that collapse when it's already stable. This scrum collapses, and the ball actually gets destabilized, putting the put-in team under a lot of pressure. So even if the scrum is going to collapse, if we wait just that extra second for this, or 2 or 3, for the scrum to completely stabilize, we might have a chance. Also, getting the back rows attached to the scrum properly, not heads up, and it might seem a little bit pedantic, but their impact on their front row players is huge. Other things in the setup, just making sure that the shoulders are all out. You know, we see the tight head is already starting in a bit of an angle. This loose head is not in a position to succeed. You know, the flanker is not on. So just making sure that all the jobs that we can find in that alignment stability, alignment, binding, and stability process is done even before we start the crouch sequence. The other thing that is a bit of an issue too, we see the hookers aren't aligned properly either. This is the right foot of the hooker. This is the right foot of the hooker. We see that the green team is actually to the right of the left team. So at this level, the players often will just try to make it better. And as you see, as the front rows go down, there's actually movement to try and adjust. So red adjusts to their left by pushing this way, blue adjusts by pushing that way, and we're going to have a lot of pressure coming in on the hookers and on the green tight head here, resulting in this green tight head having to adjust and get further away from the scrum, because we see the hookers coming in on him a little bit. He has to get his feet back, and we see he's not in a strong position at all here, with his legs overextended almost at 180 degrees. He's got one way to go. It's down. She does quite well to keep the loose head out here. But again, those little micro adjustments, it's not necessarily cheating or illegal scrummaging from the teams, but they make their adjustments if they don't have the space to be able to, you know, get a good, strong, comfortable position to be able to push forward. So, and again, another thing that we didn't do particularly well across the group is, let's look at this alignment here. So obviously we got a shoulder hidden from the loose head from blue. This tight head is already starting in to create a 2-on-1 with the hooker. Another shoulder hidden with the loose head on red, also the angle. Back rows actually look pretty good. These two teams are two of the more successful scrums in the competition. So we see that there's some good work in the bridge area here as well as here. But again, these angles right before the referee calls crouch is a bit of an issue. And again, lots of pressure coming in. And the team does actually quite well to survive, but then the scrum actually starts turning, and the red team's actually able to generate a penalty originating from this situation here where we have a hooker going one way, the loose head going the other way, and there's nowhere for the tight head to push. And had it been the issue happening on the other side, we probably would have seen the same outcome. But the scrum doesn't really go forward on both sides of the scrum either. This tight head prop just kind of stays on the spot, and then it kind of looks like at the end like they go forward, seeing the other team's scrum disintegrating, selling the picture that it's a penalty kick. And if we let the scrum go on this long, we have to, there's no reset here, you have to blow a penalty because the blue team, you know, has been dominated, albeit illegally, by the red team. But going back to the source, let's get everyone bound properly, meaning shoulders out. Let's get everyone aligned properly, meaning the hookers to the left, as well as the, you know, both loose heads and tight heads straight to start with. Particularly when we know that, you know, tight heads are generally going to go down and out, and loose heads are generally going to go up and in, which is fine, but they have to at least be starting straight so that we can have a chance of the scrum going forward on both sides of the scrum or staying square so that the ball can come out cleanly, if that makes sense for scrum time. So again, nothing to do with the two examples, the teams or the referees. They're just trends that we've seen across the board. Lastly, before we throw it over the group, our empathy. So actions louder than words. A couple of examples here. Actually, we'll just go with one. So we've seen situations like this quite often where we've blown the whistle and the game actually gets disrupted by, you know, a verbal or a you know, a physical, you know, altercation either between players or player to referee. Stopping the game to have a discussion with the captain and then having the same outcome is not going to change the behavior. So again, if we have that problem where if you feel it needs to be addressed, if a player has done an action, either physical or verbal, that needs to be sanctioned with a penalty or more, you know, having the time off moment, although may not be necessary, isn't the worst thing in the world, but we have to follow that up with an outcome. We can't simply be having time off moments, having a discussion with the captain, and then going back to the same outcome, whether it was a scrum or a penalty on the same mark. The players will, if we do have an opportunity to manage, you know, there's going to be a line out in 30 seconds. There might be a scrum in another 10 seconds, or there might be a try. There's other opportunities if we feel that we need to send a message to players or to captains that don't require the accompaniment of a card or a penalty. Save it for a moment where the game's naturally stopped. That way you're not giving power to the player who's done something, other if he's pushed someone or if he's shouted at the referee or shouted at his opposition. Us stopping the game, time off, what everyone expects, spectators, players that are always watching what we do, they expect an action. So in this situation, if we're unhappy, we could have gone the extra 10 meters. We could have yellow carded. Let's just make sure that if we're going to stop the game, we're following that with an actionable outcome rather than just a verbal one. So that's really it for areas to improve. We'll actually have to save the comments and questions for another time. We're running up against the clock. as we have to be finished just before 7. So just setting up some goals for 2020. Obviously we want to make smart breakdown decisions. This is building on the strength that we've already seen so far this year. So just keeping true to those definitions. The tackler is not in the way, and the arriving defender is able to lift the ball. I think if we're able to do this, we're going to get quick ball and better outcomes. And if scrums aren't your thing, quick ball leads to less handling errors, leads to less scrums. Scrum setup, like it or not, we have to get back to the basics. Alignment, binding, stability, compliance at every step. And the key across the board, if we do nothing else, let's just let the scrum settle after the bind call. So once we say bind, people are going to adjust their feet and shoulders and hips and angles. And once all that movement and wiggling, as I've heard some referees describe it, stops, we can call set. As we just mentioned, on the run management, only when it adds value. So, obviously the double captain chat should be like a once or twice a season thing, and it should be, I'm going to be successful with this. But again, every time we stop the game to have a conversation, we have a sensible outcome. It's either a penalty kick or it's a card. We're not just carrying on with the same outcome, because if we stop the game unnecessarily and we have this big warning, the players will see right through that. And obviously the spectators will as well, but we're not going to change behavior, which is the whole point of everything we do. It's to affect the game positively. So tying into those time off moments, avoid them if possible. There's ways to send messages and warnings at the next stoppage, whether it be a line out or whether it be on the run or whether it be at a scrum. Actions are louder than words. And just a quote from someone who's quite prominent in the refereeing and refereeing coach world: every interaction you have adds to or takes away from a relationship. So often our best relationships on the field are nonverbal. So let's just keep that in mind, that everything we do will either add or take away. So if we have nothing that's going to be positive, let's just not have those interactions and wait until moments where we can make sure that we're in a situation where the players and the referee can win. In other words, come away with something constructive and clear. And often outcomes are those clear moments, not words. Resources. So a couple of things have changed. We'll show you really quickly on the website. So in the coach logic setup, our filters have actually been adjusted to mirror those new definitions. So our breakdown, space, set piece, and foul play refereeing skills are embedded in those coach logic filters. So if you were going to be doing some analysis and you wanted to have a template to work off of, so to speak, there's the filters option here. You click on this button and you can, the downward arrow, and you actually import filters. So if we import them, the one that says, any game that says 31 filters, so we import these 31 filters. It's still the red, amber, green system, but again, all of these have to do with our skills. So breakdown tackler, arriving player entry, defender able to lift the ball, support moving opposition, space, clearing onside. Obviously, we're putting through reds and ambers and greens depending on how we feel the clip we choose to make. It could be categorized. So obviously, once you click save, then that's in there. A neat little way to use these on the fly while you're watching the video. You actually just click tag mode here, and then if we're watching, and I decide I see something in the game that's I'm not quite sure I needed to blow that tackler decision, you actually just click on it, and it will automatically create you a tag that's 30 seconds long. And you can actually go back later and edit it, but as you're watching the game, you just click on green, yellow, red, all this, and it will just create a whole bunch of filters. And when you want to say something, you just click on the little pencil, and you can do your at referees, or you can do your at individuals, or etc. I'm not going to click save, but always click save. It saves all your filters. And as soon as you address @referees, it will pop up in your team room of anyone you've addressed, whether it's @referees or @individuals, and then we can continue to have those discussions. Obviously, the stats from games are posted up here as well. And if someone's posted something you don't like, you can reply to it and weigh in your opinion or bring other people into the conversation. So to really taking advantage of this resource, the people that are using it are generally improving. So let's make sure we take advantage of the cool tools that we have. Last thing I'll show you before we get off the call today is the new resources page that's been revamped. So obviously our on-field resources, the definition and skills are embedded here. So definitions for players, coaches, referees. So the language we use with players, all up in here. If we stay consistent, we're fine. Obviously the skills for what we need to observe and decide correspond are here. 2 videos have gone out. The breakdown has been separated into 2, tackler and arriving player. Those video links are here. And actually, if you click on any of those, it will bring you to our new education page. So BC Rugby has actually been separated into 2 channels on YouTube. So there's one that's called BC Rugby Match Videos, and there's another one that's called BC Rugby Education. So all the match footage, from PRCs and all that is in the BC Rugby Match Videos, and all of our educational content are here in the playlists for BC Rugby Education. So that's all available to you. And before we go, just going back to that bcrugby.com referee resources, I've set up a couple more off-field resources. Our prep and review templates changed to correspond to those new definitions. So have a look at that template if you have a moment. And there's an expected outcomes training exercise that can be done over the holidays using any rugby, whether it's your own or other people. So no time to get into that now, but if you want to have a play with those resources and have a few questions, by all means, fire them away on the referee Facebook group, or otherwise, we'll end the call right there. Thanks so much for those who are participating. This will be posted up online on the BC Rugby Education YouTube channel, probably in about an hour's time. So again, thanks to everyone who joined us on the call, and we hope to be seeing everyone at the Rugby Education Conference on the 11th and 12th Vancouver. Have a look at bcrugby.com if you haven't already registered. Our season restarts January 18th, and our in-person workshops and online workshops are all available on the development sessions tab on bcrugby.com/referee resources. Thanks very much, everyone.